Hey, I'm Mark.
And I'm Craig.
This is Songwriters Tales. Craig, today, I think we're going to have to start a producer series because we've had some big ones, and this cat is right there in the middle of the big boy club when it comes to producers. But I mean, he does more than producing, but I mean, Lordy mercy. Fred Mollin. Let's talk about Fred Mollin.
Fred Mollin is, I'm going to mention some names that Fred has worked with. You ready for this? Dan Hill, the song Sometimes When We Touch. Johnny Mathis, Bill Medley of the Righteous Brothers, America, Colin Ray, Eddie Money, Chris Christopherson, Billy Ray Cyrus, Engelbert Humperdinck, Jimmy Webb. And it goes on and on. Sheryl Crow, I see her name here. And, it just goes on. And, we've already done the podcast. This is the intro, Mark. So, I'm still sitting here with my jaw down. So
Yeah, me too.
this is part one.
You had me at Jimmy Webb. So let's do it. Hey, it's Mark. We are back with someone who his resume reads, I can't even think of a word. It's crazy. Anyway, we are here with Fred Mollin. And Fred, thank you. First of all, thank you for coming on the podcast. I'm gonna let Craig kind of kick us off, but it's a pleasure to meet you. I want to talk. I want to talk about the first big thing that you produced that is probably one of the best records, everything I've ever heard on the radio. And it's not just me saying that; a lot of people say that about that song. So, in that production. So, but Craig, you kick it off for us and give the man a little bit of love so we can jump into this.
Absolutely, man. Fred, all the way from LA, right?
At the moment, yeah.
At the moment. Well, we are so glad you're here. So I came in touch with you, or we came in touch with each other through Rex Benson. And there's a hotbed out in LA of incredible talent, and Rex seems to be right in the middle of it for some reason. But that's awesome. He's one of our favorites. Thank you for coming on. And I did as well. I'm reading through your resume, and I actually had to go take a nap halfway through it. It's like I'm exhausted just reading about it.
Or you got a headache. I don't know, either one or the other.
Oh my gosh,
Well,
it was
my
awesome.
first question is, what are you, 150? How can you work
Yeah.
with this many people?
Well, the age thing is definitely it's challenging. I'm 73 now.
There you go. There you
Wow.
go. Well, we
you don't
mentioned,
look it, and you're certainly living the dream.
Well, we
you're kind.
mentioned,
Thank you.
we mentioned just a handful of the folks that you've worked with, and we'll touch on some of that in the podcast. But in the intro, we talked about that. You've got a book out. We've got all kind of things to talk about. So I'm going to just say you are a producer, an arranger, a composer, an instrumentalist with guitars and keys. You've worked with individual artists. You've worked on Disney movies, things that people have seriously seen. So would you just give us a brief history of your background? If I remember correctly, you're from Canada, right? Was that
No,
your...
actually, I moved to Canada when I was 17.
Okay.
But if you're asking for sort of a quick, sort of bio,
Sure.
Yeah.
I can do that. I've done it before. Let's see if I can start at the right place here. I was born.
Oh, that's a good start.
Yeah. No,
Well, can you back up a little bit?
yeah. So in my early years were in Long Island, New York, where I grew up in Merrick.
Okay. Cool.
And the Beatles really changed. I mean, I was a very musical kid, really early on, but the Beatles changed everything. And when I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, February 9th, 1964, the day before my birthday, I literally, I saw my path completely. So I decided I wanted to have long hair. I wanted to be able to play guitar, wanted the girls screaming for me, and sing my own songs. And so then, so I had my own rock bands as a kid, and then By the time I was, 16, I was heading towards being a singer-songwriter, as that seemed to be an interesting path for me. I quit school when I was 16, didn't make it through the I made it, first 3 months of 10th grade, and then I was gone because I officially turned 16. And my parents, who, were lovely, and my mom especially was a tremendous support, they just saw it coming, so I had no problem in wanting to start my musical life early. So I quit school, although again, people around me in the neighborhood were horrified that I quit because, kids like me didn't quit. It was, they thought I was, gonna join the circus or something. They thought I was like a freak. So, and on some levels, back then probably you were considered a freak.
Yeah, true.
So I then found myself a year later following my older brother, who I was very, very close to, who had moved to Toronto in Canada. And, within literally a year of being there, I was asked to produce a demo for Dan Hill, and, Dan and I were both playing folk clubs together. And so I'd never produced, but I knew a lot about production. I knew a lot about music recording because I was very fascinated by that part of it. And so he asked me to produce this little demo. I did, and he had interestingly, he was very sharp, Dan, and he created sort of a creative blind date for me and his best friend, Matt McCauley, who was a really gifted character, could arrange a full orchestra at age 17 and whatever. So we made a great pairing, and we wound up producing Dan's first album in Canada, which did really well. And all of a sudden, my whole world of wanting to become a performer was now pushed to the back, and I became a record producer at age 19. And shortly after, we had two other albums. We did the first album in Canada, and it came out in the US, didn't do anything in the US, but it was a big hit in Canada. Then we did another album called Hold On for Dan, and that was, again, big hit in Canada, didn't do a thing in the US. And so for 20th Century Fox Records in the US, they sort of gave all of us, Matt, me, and Dan, a sort of a threat in 1977. And they said, if you don't have a hit in the US, we have to drop you. And,
Ah,
we're just kids. I mean, I was 22 and Matt was 21 and Danny was 21. And we'd had some success with that and some other artists. So we felt pretty good about ourselves. But then when we had this sort of hammer dropped by Harvey Cooper saying, listen, we love you guys, but if you don't have a hit, we're dropping you. So then Dan at that point had been administrated, his publishing had been administrated by ATV, which at that point was a very big publishing company based out of the UK and LA. And they invited Dan to come to LA to try to co-write with people. And by the way, this was very foreign to Dan and actually very foreign to all the singer-songwriters. The James Taylors,
mhm.
all these people, they really wrote by themselves. And so Dan was very uncomfortable in trying to co-write a song, but he went to LA and they paired him up with Barry Mann. And
Oh,
Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil are the most successful husband and wife team in the history of songwriting. And I knew so much about Barry and Cynthia. And I said, Dan, oh my God, you're going to write with Barry Mann. I said, this is unbelievable. I mean, he's the greatest writer. He wrote On Broadway. I mean, he wrote like,
yeah.
You've Lost That Love and Feeling. I mean, come on, Dan, this is nuts. So he went to LA and they met in Beverly Hills. And Danny was so uncomfortable that he could not really write a co-write with Barry that day. And at the end of the day, Barry said, um, "Hey, man, it didn't work out today, but do you have a lyric? And I'll just go home and put music to it." And Dan just pulled something out of his guitar case, and it was Sometimes When We Touch, because that turned out to be our biggest hit.
Oh, yeah.
And and it had been a song that Danny had written already with music, and that Matt and I had heard it, and we actually had turned it down.
Wow.
It was just very plodding. It wasn't at all a hit. The
Mhm.
lyrics could have been, but the music he put to it was not. And so he gave Barry this lyric. Barry went home that night, wrote the music, and wrote the melody and the chords to the lyrics, sang it into a little boombox, and then sent us by courier a cassette. And we heard the cassette with Barry singing Sometimes When We Touch, and we all just dropped. I mean, it was like, oh my God. And back in that day, guys, you know, a hit was possible. You could actually say this can be a hit, and it
Yeah.
could have been a hit. With
Yeah.
the right promotion, it could have been a hit. And damn if it wasn't a smash hit because it was a worldwide hit. I think it's one of the 200 most played records in the history of radio.
I believe it.
And in my book, I have to explain that, I wanna tell the story of my hit. It's my biggest hit because I'll never have a hit as big as that, and how do you follow that, So, anyway, long and short of the rest of my bio is that, I continued producing, but then in the mid-80s, I fell into composing for TV and film, and for the next 17 years, I really nonstop composed tons of series and tons of dramatic series, tons of, movies, and it was fantastic for the financial gain, and I took good care of my family, but it was relentless, and the pressure was psychotic, and it was lonely. And
Mm.
after a lot of years, I made a big change in my life on every level and moved to Nashville because that's where the live musicians in the studio were still thriving. And I wanted to go back to making records for others. And I moved there in 2001, and I've been there ever since.
Wow. That's incredible, Mark. That's inspiration for you and me. I was going to
No
mention to
kidding.
you, Fred, I can't remember when it was. It seems like it was 25 years ago when I was just first going out to Nashville as a songwriter, and I was reading information from other people. I'm one of those guys that I figure don't reinvent the wheel, just learn from them that have already trod the path, right? So,
Yeah.
and I somehow or another I came across an article or an interview, and I don't remember who it was. I want to say it was Clive Davis, but I can't absolutely say that. But it was somebody iconic like that who knew songs, and he mentioned that song sometimes when we touched. He said this song is probably the most well written and most perfect song that's ever been.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
mean that's saying a lot, but
Well,
obviously, but
I mean, it was, we knew it was a hit, It's
yeah.
so funny because,
Mm.
and by the way, Clive Davis then after that moved, we didn't work for Clive until then, and then based on that, he moved Matt and I to LA, and, we were his boys for, like, at least a year before we ran into trouble, and then we were on our own. Um, there's not a lot of love lost between me and Clive, but you can't knock his wildly amazing success,
Yeah, he knows what he
and he
knows.
does. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
and he was our biggest fan. But, that song, it's funny, um, it was really geared, without knowing it, by us, but certainly by Dan, who wrote a lot of songs that were very emotional lyrically, really for women, and women loved and girls loved that song. And at the same time, a lot of guys did too, and we loved it for what we did with it. We knew it was a hit commercially. It felt like something like Elton John's "Your Song."
Yes.
It was that simple and great, and we knew it was gonna be a hit if they put some money behind it, which they did. And, at the same time, though, it's funny because it then sorta morphed into being considered middle of the road music, you
Mhm.
know, adult contemporary,
Right.
and so a lot of the people I wanted to produce right away were not considering Matt and I, and then Matt had to leave because he found a very wealthy woman, and he retired. Uh And, but I was on
Nice.
my own producing, needing to make a living, and a lot of people I wanted to produce, when they heard that I produced Sometimes When We Touch said, "Oh, no, he does MOR stuff," So,
Mm.
it's just funny, you get typecast on all this stuff.
With
Well, go
everything.
ahead, Mark.
No, I was just gonna say, that's so true. I mean, especially, it seems like in the music and in the TV business, it's like if you're a TV guy, you don't do movies. If you're a movie guy, you don't do TV. Was it that way with composing as well? I mean,
Yeah,
or
I mean, that's why I did so many horror and sci-fi things. Because once you did
Mhm.
one and they liked it, they go, "Well, he's the horror guy." He's the
right.
sci-fi guy. I mean, I would have loved to have done romantic comedies too and stuff, but they
Mhm.
kept on throwing the right money at me to do all these horror films and sci-fi films.
Well, I was gonna ask you, so when you have that level of success and that level of just the high of, you get the music back from Barry Mann and you go, "Oh my god, this is," we could everybody in the anybody who's a musician can hear a song and go, "Oh, that's a hit." I mean, it people say, "Well, I understand when this is gonna be a hit or that's gonna be a hit," but sometimes you just hear a song and you go, "Oh my god." Well, so how do you follow that up? because when you have that level
Well,
of I
that's
mean,
like that's on the dust cover of my book because it
yeah,
says, you know,
not even professionally
how
as
do you
much
follow that
as
up, you know?
emotionally,
Yeah.
or how do you? Because I mean, when you reach the top of the mountain and you're 22 or you're 23, and obviously, you know, you wanna reproduce that with other artists, but that has to be a major hill to climb emotionally, if nothing else.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I just think we have, certainly a lot of us, and I think it's a male problem too, is that we have a lot to prove, as
Mm.
we grow up,
Mhm.
and frankly, we have a lot to prove until you're good and settled, probably in your middle years. So I think there was so much there that was the pressure to prove ourselves, and we never had a follow-up hit with Dan that was substantial. And after another album, we parted ways because uh, Dan found a way out of the contract with Matt's parents, and it was quite a
Mm.
mess. But you know, I don't think we could have ever had as big a hit as Sometimes When We Touch, because I think it was sort of a perfect storm.
Mm.
But to answer your question, emotionally, I just think I was good. I mean, I had a lot of great things happening in my life. I wanted to have a family. I was married now, and I wanted to have a family. And um, you know, was young, so I felt very musically and physically able to just, you know,
Mhm.
try to prove myself further. And
Mhm.
so I think it wasn't really hard at all, you know, for the first while after Sometimes We Touch. When things started to slow down, though, which they did after a couple of years in LA, I decided with my wife to move back to Toronto, where I had, you know, had my first successes, and which really was a home for me.
Mhm.
And I was at that point, you know, a green card in a sense Canadian, and
Mhm.
then I later on became a dual citizen. But we moved back in '81, and I think the rough years were '81 through about '85 comparatively, because I wasn't getting much work. And, you know, you would have thought, "Oh my god, a hometown hero comes back to Toronto," you
Right.
know, I'd be fighting people off, but I really wasn't. It was sort of like, "Hey, welcome back," you know,
Mm.
and so you know, so actually I remember '82 through about end of '84 being very hard on me. I wasn't making money, I wasn't busy. I was doing but I was sort of getting my feet wet because people would call me and say, "Hey, do you wanna do a little, TV, like half an hour TV movie? Um, would you wanna score that?" And of course, I had no interest in scoring. I was a record guy and a performer, but I said, because I always say this, when people offer me a job, I say yes. I
Exactly.
learned sort of the craft of composing for TV and film by just doing these small little projects, and then eventually I got a TV series out of Canada, um, and I'm not gonna say the name of it, but it's an unknown series. It ran for 1 year, and it was absolutely terrible. It was actually one
And
of
what
the
was the
worst.
name of it? I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
I can't tell you because I don't wanna hurt
No,
anybody's
I know.
feelings.
I know.
No, I hear you.
But, you know, but no, but the thing is, but it afforded me, a chance to score a TV series that was
Right.
dramatic and slightly comedic, and I got better at it, and then literally, you know, that just sort of built. My career as a TV and film composer built. My record production career was really dead.
Mhm.
Next thing you know, in by '86 and '87, I was really busy as a TV and film composer, and then I got the call to do Friday the 13th, the series, for Paramount, which was being shot in Canada,
Mhm.
and so I was able to do that series, then even do part 7 and part 8 of the movies, and I was doing all sorts of other, you know, stuff. I was doing, you know, you name it. I was doing 3 series at once generally, and was busier than a one-armed paper hanger, and I was really, you know, just very grateful because it was a musical life,
Mhm.
and I was able to make a lot of money for the family and for me and have a wonderful life, but the work was really lonely and really, really the deadlines were challenging.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so after about 16 years of composing nonstop, I turned to myself in the mirror and I said, "You know, you gotta go back to making records." And Nashville's the only place left to do that with live musicians. So in 2001, I moved there. But I can tell you that, it was the music for film and TV that really saved my butt in a lot of ways because my record work really had dwindled even though I'd had this big hit.
Mm. No, I've got a question for you. one of the reasons Mark and I started this podcast was to give songwriters and people in the industry encouragement, because, a lot of people don't see the backside of the business. They just see what they see on the stage and the spotlight and the successes. That's what they see. And that's not real. That is not reality. And so we want to encourage people who are struggling, who are just going, oh gosh, what do I need to do? I was joking with Rex, when he was on our show. I said, so Rex, it's our understanding you're going to tell us how, exactly what steps to take to make absolutely sure your song becomes a hit. And he looked at us, he kind of leaned to the camera and goes, nobody can do that.
Yeah, he said that's
But-
a hell of a
but-
question.
but tell us, you talked about you were composing for movies and television. Did you go to school for that, or are you self-taught? Because
No,
this is where
first of
I'm
all,
leading.
literally, I quit school as I mentioned. At
Okay, so you didn't
16.
go back. You didn't go back.
No, I never went back. So my what people knew me as in my TV and film years was a guy who could emulate an orchestra, but using synths and samplers.
Okay,
So I was playing everything.
you had the ear.
So
You already had the
I had
built-in.
a great studio in my home in Toronto, and I had tons of racks of gear, and it was I became this one-man orchestra because I was a good musician, and also I knew how to write hooks, and so I was a good choice for some things. I want to say something, and it's not. I'm a reasonably humble character, but I can be honest with you and say what I'm really great at compared to what I suck at. And I suck at so much that I can tell you one of the few things I'm really good at is making records. And if someone, let's say, well, no, let's go this way. If I was directing a movie, I would not hire me to write the score, But if someone was making a record, I'd hire me. If I was making a record, I'd hire me to produce. But I felt like I did the best I could. I created a style for myself that people seemed to like for the projects and TV and film that I did. And I was just very grateful, for the success of it. But it wasn't like all my life I wanted to become a film and TV composer. It was just really a way to make a living and still be musical. So I'm very proud of the years that I scored.
He's a good old boy, never meaning no harm. Did you know that Mark Waldron, my partner with Songwriters Tales, is the son of the producer and creator of the Dukes of Hazzard? That's right. And if you go to episode number 24, you're going to meet Timothy Baker, who is an artist living in Nashville, but from Hazzard, Kentucky. Go there.